Welcome back to The Gaze. I'm Henry Keane and this is my show Talk for More. I am happy to meet you here on a digital platform of a new Europe, a place where we'll highlight and find all of the most interesting events in the region and talk about it with the best of experts. Today we're going to talk about a year and a half of a brutal criminal aggression of Russia against Ukraine. What are the consequences for Europe, Eurasia, collective West and Russia itself, for all of us? We are going to talk over more in this very episode. I have my personal interest. I actually am very interested in what Putin is thinking now about what is going on in the world. I can roughly imagine what he was thinking about back then. He wanted Kiev in 3 days, Zelensky dead and gone, and a royal Russian viceroy instead of him. But now, what is he thinking? Probably and highly likely, these Ukrainians, why they are not just lay down and die already. And to learn why Ukrainians just don't lay down and die, let me take you back in time, when it all just started. 2 days before the full-scale invasion, the Russian parliament blessed the participation of Russian army in military operation outside the country. It was a religious act, actually a baptism of a sort. The Kremlin officially authorized the war. From now on, the killings of Ukrainians becomes a sacrosanct necessity of every Russian patriot. The morning of February 24th, 2022 changed the life of Ukraine and the world order forever. Putin announced what he calls a special military operation and started what the rest of the world calls criminal aggression and full-scale war in the heart of Europe. 3 days. That's in how long Russia planned to take over Kiev. This did not happen because the Ukrainians somehow did not lay down and die. Moreover, they stood up and fight, and continue doing that to this very day. Taking into account and not for granted the great support of the collective West, of course. No one wanted or even expected that war. Come on, it is 21st century. We got somewhat used to solving international issues diplomatically. Well, if there is someone worth addressing diplomacy to at another end, which is simply not the case with Russia. Ukraine wanted then and now a very simple and natural thing: to preserve the life of its people and the sovereignty of its lands. But as Golda Meir once managed to put it perfectly right, saying, "We intend to remain alive while our neighbors want to see us dead," this is not a question that leaves much room for compromise. If you think that there still is such a room for compromise with a terrorist that violates international law and its own obligation and promises the very next moment they are given, well then come over to Ukraine. See Odessa harbors, see burnt grain, visit Bucha, talk to people, to fathers and mothers of murdered children or those abducted and sent to Russia. And I wonder, what would you say if that were your children? Yes, Ukraine wants peace. So to end the war, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, presented his peace formula at the G20 summit. These are the conditions under which Ukraine sees an end to the war, presuming to sit at the negotiating table with, yes, Russia. As the first point comes radiation and nuclear safety. The second is food security. The third is energy security. Fourth, Ukraine demands the release of all prisoners and deportees. Fifth, the implementation of the UN Charter and the restoration of the territorial integrity of Ukraine and the world order. Sixth, the withdrawal of Russian troops and cessation of hostilities. The seventh key requirement is justice. The eighth is to stop and prevent ecocide. The ninth point is the prevention of escalation of war. The last point, 10th, is a confirmation of the end of the war. Zelensky emphasized that each of these simple, clear and actually obvious demands on the way to peace should not and cannot take much time to be achieved. A maximum is 1 month for one point to turn into reality. For some of them, a few days are enough, believes the Ukrainian president. In Saudi Arabia, representatives of 40 countries met behind closed doors without, of course, a representative of the aggressor country, the Russian Federation. Zelensky's peace formula was discussed, but there was no final statement done based on the results of these talks. Just usual talks. And that is happening, or rather said, not yet happening, while the idea of Ukrainian peace formula as such and a need for it to be finally accepted by the world is already openly and widely supported by 58 countries, said the head of the Office of the President, Ukraine, Andrei Yermak. It is certainly not the peace formula that contains an apple of discord in it, that is not allowing the world to accept it. The formula is simple, clear, and demands nothing more that was and is already written literally everywhere in the Rome Statute, constitutions of all countries of the world, the Declaration of Human Rights, a UN Charter, you name it, that a sovereignty and territorial integrity of a country and the rights of nations, freedom of choice. So I guess it is fair enough to say that we all want to be free and we all want to be safe. None of us wants to experience the radioactive fallouts, war, and murder. So maybe it is fair to say that the problem is not in Zelensky's peace formula but in the world itself, and namely in the security organizations of the world that are actually just not ready for the challenge of such a scale. Let us talk for more in this episode about that. The possible political consequences of this war we will discuss with Sergey Lagodinsky, German lawyer, politician and publicist, member of the European Parliament of the Alliance 90, the Greens. Schönen guten Tag, Mr. Lagodinsky. Hello.
Schönen guten Tag aus Deutschland.
All right, my first question to you is, what has changed, or is changing now, in German politics after the beginning of the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine?
Well, it's a constant progress. It's a constant development. It's not a static situation. We have different agendas that are changing from one term to another. At the beginning, the very hesitant agenda in terms of real ammunition and real weapons and arms support. A lot of pressure also on behalf of us as coalition members, the Greens, who were pro more massive help towards Ukraine. But now, and this is something that I'm really worried about, now we're back into the mode that we used to have before when we discussed Leopards and other arms. Now it's about Taurus, the Taurus rockets or missiles that is discussed now. We know that the Chancellor is once again is putting brakes on this development, and many of us, also within the Green Party, but also beyond that, are exerting more pressure. We know that Ukrainians are in desperate need of more and more heavy weaponry, and this is yet another chapter in this endless development. But yes, Germany has developed itself as a player on this field. Just compare it to the situation shortly before the war, where myself and our current Minister of Economy, Robert Habeck, were the two voices, lonely voices, who advocated for weapon and arms support for Ukraine. Everyone else, including the government, were against it. Now the situation is totally different.
Well, Russia has always been politically and economically close to Germany. At least we all know where Helmut Kohl, the former German chancellor, lives these days, in Russia. But nevertheless, my question is the following. In your opinion, have the mindsets of German politicians changed at the moment, right now? And in what direction, if that is the case, or the attitude of the population regards of, the rising of inflation, the cost of heating, for example, still has a great deal of influence on the decisions of German politicians?
It's a complex and a very difficult relationship, a relationship about which I would rather say someone like a therapist should talk. I usually say, because I deal also with commemoration policies in Germany and have been writing about this, it's like watching a patient on a therapist couch, and you think that you uncover another and another layer of its subconsciousness, and yet there is always a layer that can surprise you. Yes, Germany had a close relationship with Russia, not only due to economic interests that are obvious, and you probably meant Chancellor Schröder, who is indeed alive and kicking and is quite involved in Gazprom business. But it is also about the wrongly channeled, I would say, responsibility, historical responsibility of Germany, where this responsibility, which is absolutely legitimate and an absolutely right lesson from German history, has been channeled towards Russia solely, alone, without understanding the diversity of the Soviet Union and the role of republics and inhabitants from Ukrainian Republic, from Georgian Republic, also in both suffering during the World War II, but also in combating the Hitler Germany. Everything is monopolized, or had been monopolized, by the Kremlin. And this is something that is changing now also in the population. Unfortunately, the price for it are countless lives of Ukrainians. But there is a difference now in how Germans look at Russia and at Ukraine and many other republics compared to 1.5 years ago.
Germany can fight back, of course, but what about Eastern Europe, Poland, Baltic states? Is it fair to assume that we still are having possibility of military escalation, say at Suwalski Gap, aren't we?
I think we have to take that seriously, and many of myself and many of our colleagues in the European Parliament have been always, for many years already, seriously warning about the security escalation and the security implications, especially for Central and Eastern Europe. I would not say that we should now start panicking. Why? Because in many cases, this is what Russia and Kremlin wants. It does want to intimidate our population. And many of those who say that we should settle now with Russia, that's what many people say. One of the arguments is, well, otherwise we are next. We don't want escalation. And from that perspective, we have to be also fair and to say that membership in NATO for many of those countries is the security insurance. And I don't see, apart from hybrid threats, and with Wagner Brigade, we will be watching this very closely. But regarding the kind of conventional threat by the Russian Federation, for now it is contained. But this is, by the way, an argument why Ukraine should also face a perspective and have a very tangible perspective of NATO membership, so that it is also safe in the future.
Well, Russian propaganda is repeatedly airing the idea of that, the righteous destruction. Like it is necessary to bomb and send tanks to Warsaw, to Poland, to London. Such a, let's call it a statement. How are they perceived in Europe? Is Europe somewhat afraid? Because you told me that at some point, some people are afraid in Europe. Is that what you're saying?
I think that the addressees of those statements are, of course, number one, is the domestic Russian audience. This is clear. This is the cheapest and qualitatively the most laughable, but very effective propaganda of Goebbels-like qualities. But the other addressees of this propaganda are the public's certain elements, certain parts of our European publics who should be intimidated, as I said. And I think that it doesn't even work vis-a-vis Polish audiences. The effect in Poland, as you see, is that the government has a very securitized agenda, that the upcoming elections will be, among other things, dominated by the threat and countering the threat from Russia. And we see a militarization, an increasing militarization of Polish presence on the border. But in countries like Germany, in countries like France, where the response is not, let's be strong, and let's try to strongly counter this threat, but rather the other way around. Let's have a deal. Let's not escalate. You know, the de-escalation is something that is the term that I have been hearing for years and decades before this war. Then there was quite a calm in terms of using this word. It was only used by marginalized groups who always remained, even after the beginning of the war, on the side of Putin. And now it is coming back. There is a renaissance, a revival of this escalation fear. And this is due to those ridiculous narratives that are spread by Russian TV, by Solovyov, Kiselov, and others. It is being received here, and it is being watched with a magnified glass. And this is what they want.
All right, but this is pure fear. They are escalating the pure fear and maybe some sort of a laziness that was always belonged to Europe, like in World War II, in World War I. They were expecting to make a deal with a dictatorship, and what happened? Maybe the lesson will be learned this time with our help, with media, and with your help. And thank you very much for your expertise, for your time. Sergey Lagodinsky, German lawyer, politician and publicist, member of the European Parliament of the Alliance 19, the Green. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава. But we all heard that it is politics that is a litmus that causes wars. Actually, the reason, but it's true to some extent. But let us not forget that the war as such is a hell of a business. Stakes raised, cash flows, careers soar, but that is only on the political side of the street. On a battlefield side, things look a bit more dire. Let me remind you of the difference between political challenges and military ones. During the year and a half of the war, battles for Kiev, for Bucha, and Irpin, for Gostomel, for Azovstal, and many others were fought. The modern, absolutely European-looking city of Mariupol literally vanished from the face of the earth. A Russian super-powerful bomb fell on the Mariupol drama theater, where hundreds of people were hiding. And next to the building, there was an absolutely visible inscription in white, giant letters, telling children. That did not help. Terrorist is the terrorist and behaves accordingly. Every day, every week, Russian aggression brings more and more disaster and grief to Ukrainian cities: Vinnytsia, Dnipro, Korynevych, Kramatorsk, Kherson and Kremenchuk. There is simply no place in Ukraine where Russian missiles cannot reach, and Ukraine is also well aware about life, or better said, existence, under Russian occupation, and the liberation of these lands came at a cost of a great blood and sorrow. The atrocities of the Russian occupiers were revealed to the world. Echelons of stolen property, mutilated lives, devastated destinies, and rapes and mass murder and fire, nameless graves, that is, was Russia brought on Ukrainian land. The occupiers did not care for gender or age. That is a Russian way to be tolerant. You see, just kill them all Ukrainians, that's it. Well, this once again proves that the Russians want nothing else but to simply destroy Ukraine as a country and Ukrainians as a nation. What is it, buddy? What the world thought to be long outdated? Nazi paradigm reborn in the Kremlin. However, the Ukrainians showed the world they can and will return destroy and Russian military arrogance. In April last year, the Ukrainian military sank the Russian warship, the cruiser Moskva, and in July the Ukrainian flag was raised again on Zmyny Island. Autumn 2022 has been marked by Ukrainian armed forces liberating Balaklia, Izum, Kupiansk, and yet another counteroffensive success in the south of the country. The right bank of the Dnipro River is now under complete Ukrainian control. No surprise, in the liberated territories, the world discovers mass graves and mutilated dead bodies, a Russian way of liberating Ukrainians, that is. During the winter of 2023, the Russians were able to completely destroy the city of Bakhmut and seize it. Nothing else but a small city with a zero strategic value that cost the Kremlin billions in dollars, tens of thousands of lives lost, enormous reputational troops morale, and that was a sacrifice in the name of an ill desire to keep calling this burnt zero grounds of Bakhmut Russian. Well, to force to Russian lose that much resources in Bakhmut should be called most stunning victory of Ukraine in this war so far. Mark my words, the Kremlin red walls cracked exactly there and then in Bakhmut. Suit yourself, there are zero military advances for Russians to this very day. And since there are no military advances and successes, the Kremlin grabs a nuclear club as a last resort in an attempt to remind the world that the Russia either has what it wants or turns the planet into nuclear-scorched earth. "We need no world without Russia," Mr. Putin said. This is usual Soviet rhetoric. Russians were talking exactly like that when they blasted the Kakhovskaya PHPP. I know many of you may not understand this at the moment, but that is and was a disaster of such a scale that you happen to see only in Hollywood movies, maybe. Flooded houses, hundreds of fresh water sources polluted, mass evacuation, hundreds of thousands of hectares of fertile soil, people and animal lives literally flushed into the Black Sea, ecological catastrophe, ecocide. The world's leading humanitarian and security organizations were observing, and expressing their deepest concerns as usual. The world likes the shows, you see. We all love to swing between despair and exaltation while sitting on our sofas in the safety of our homes. We are waiting for the show right now, aren't we? Waiting for the glorious, swift and fancy summer of counter-offensive of the armed forces of Ukraine, as if it really were a new Hollywood blockbuster in real life and time. Well, the President of Ukraine, Zelensky, and the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Zaluzhny, made it clear that the lives of Ukrainian defenders that are being lost every single moment, even now as we talk for more, are not a show. And therefore, all attacks of Ukrainian forces are carried out with extremely careful planning, and many of them ended with success. Siege of Russian military equipment. It looks like the Kremlin has actually achieved its goal of demilitarization just an awkwardly wrong way. It is Russia that is being demilitarized in Ukraine by Ukraine. I mean, at this stage, it is fair to say the Russian army is the main military supplier of the Ukrainian one. Well done, Mr. Putin. What else was it that Putin called a reason for this outrageous invading warfare of his that he went all wrong? Oh sure, the beloved Kremlin slogan, what was it? Stop NATO from growing bigger. And the desire of Ukraine to become a full-fledged member of the bloc Moscow called NATO at our borders. So Putin was likely, oh God, finally I can start my war and tell the world I do it in the name of peace and global security. But it somehow turned out that the Kremlin's threats have little, if any, effect, at least the effect they expected in Kremlin. After looking around a bit and seeing that bloody mess Russia brought to its borders, Finland just joins NATO. So NATO grows bigger, not only in the contrary to all the Kremlin plans, but literally thanks to them. Finland becomes the 31st member of the alliance after a long period of being militarily neutral, but enough is enough. Also, Sweden will join NATO this autumn. Moreover, NATO's open door policy is constantly heard in relation to Ukraine as well. All partners stated that there is no doubt that Ukraine will become a member of the bloc as soon as the war ends. I believe, looking at what Putin really achieved to this very day, Zelensky must admit Putin really is a great strategist when it comes to turning Ukraine towards NATO.
Ukraine is now closer to NATO than ever before. Allies reaffirmed that Ukraine will become a member of NATO and agreed to remove the requirement for a membership action plan. This will change Ukraine's membership path from a two-step process to a one-step process.
Well, of course, it takes time. At the July summit in Vilnius, Kiev did not hear the much-anticipated invitation to become a member of the bloc. Instead, the G7 countries gave quite powerful security guarantees to Ukraine. Other pro-Ukrainian discussions were heard aloud on the sidelines of the alliance. For example, the head of the NATO Secretary General's office, Stian Jensen, allowed the possibility of Ukraine joining the alliance due to the possible cession of part of its territories to the aggressor country. Jensen emphasized that Ukraine should decide for itself when and on what terms it wants to conduct negotiations. And he added that there are significant changes in the issue of Ukraine's future membership in NATO. According to him, everyone is interested in the fact that the war does not happen again in the future. I don't know what to say in this regard. On one hand, maybe Ukraine will decide that Russian mindset infected Donbass region no longer is needed by Ukrainian worth being amputated in order to stop the gangrene. On the other hand, so much Ukrainian blood already spilled, so many casualties, so many, and the relatives will no doubt demand an answer. Was it all in vain? So that is a hell of a choice for Ukrainian authorities. Or maybe not. Maybe the territorial integrity of Ukraine is even not a matter of any choice and of any discussion. Let us talk about that for more today. Rasa Jukneviciene, member of European Parliament and Ministry of Defense of Lithuania in 2008-2012. Hello.
Hello. Hello.
It is really nice to meet you, ma'am. My first question to you will sound quite provocative. Every now and then, the debates in the capitals of the West are heard about how to end this war in a way so Ukraine and all of the Europe can be secure for its future and not to be attacked by Russia in the near future, at least. Any realistic and real effective ideas on that?
You know, Ukraine is fighting in its real military front line. But in the West, we have politicians like me, others, we are fighting in so-called Western front line, where I don't think we have very clear understanding about the outcome of this war. And this is related not only with the European Union, but with the United States as well. Recently, we had NATO summit in Vilnius, in my country's capital, and we had a lot of debates in media around everywhere what happened and was it enough political will to decide the right to have the right decisions. Of course, many were somehow disappointed because of not mentioning Ukraine's future in more concrete way in NATO. But myself, being inside this Western front line in the European Parliament, following the situation, I would say that what we are lack of very clear strategy about Russia. What we would like to have in the future. You are surprised, of course. Oh, yeah. Why about Russia, not about Ukraine, but about Ukraine. Almost everybody agree that we have to help Ukraine to win this war. I will never accept understanding that we could win this war, or at least understand as a victory without any territory of Ukraine, territory recognized in 1991. But why Russia? Because for many of us, not only those countries we are next to, Belarus, to Russia, but also to the European continent, is very important to have idea, at least strategy, understanding that we need totally different Russia. And we are urging our partners in the European Union not to be afraid to defeat Putin's regime. So answering your question in more direct way, I would say that unpredictability of many countries, what does it mean victory? And is it also included defeat of this brutal, bloody regime in Russia, which, by the way, occupied Russian nation as well? This is the answer to your question. We need to have much more clear strategy. Otherwise, if it will be some kind of temporary decisions, I mean that to stop the war, to stop fighting today without defeating this regime will strike back again in few years, and this is most dangerous scenario.
Absolutely, I absolutely agree with you. I'm absolutely with you. But maybe I have a proposal. One of the ways that may help may be the Ukraine-NATO Council. It was held according to Zelensky initiative in 2 weeks after the NATO summit, if I'm not mistaken. What could be the reason, my next question is, what could be the reason for such a swift, fast decision. Is it fair to say that it was possible to solve all the issues important for Ukraine during the summit in Vilnius? Or the Independent Council really is the tool that we needed for that?
Look, of course, it's better than nothing. Of course, it's a huge step forward. When I compare the understanding in the West about Ukraine's future in NATO before this large-scale war, just 1.5 years ago, it was totally different. Very few even expected then that Ukraine can be part of NATO. Today, everybody agree and understand that Ukraine will become, it's not just wording as it was done in Bucharest in 2008, but really most countries, I think all NATO countries are sure that Ukraine will become member of NATO when this war activities will be over. It was not before. But yes, it is a step forward, but not enough. It's just a step forward. And we have to go to push NATO, also EU. By the way, it's not only about NATO important, not only NATO is important for Ukraine, as for my country was, but also membership in EU. It will change landscape, economical landscape, and it is not less easy job to do than to become NATO member. To become a NATO member maybe is more political decision, agreement among the countries to invite Ukraine. But membership in EU, it's a lot to do for Ukraine itself. We have to do our best to help Ukrainians to win this war, because it's also about the future of Europe.
I feel like Soviet Russia is still out there, and this Soviet Russia feels more impudent after Vilnius summit than it was before. Maybe it is a coincidence. I'm not a professional, so this is why I'm trying to reinstate my question. The Vilnius summit was a success, certainly a success in some point of view for Ukraine. But Russia considers it as a success just as well, and feels like more violent, more impudent, sends more missiles at Ukraine. Do you feel that way too? Or maybe I'm wrong?
Of course, we were trying to do a lot in the European Parliament. Even resolution was adopted with huge majority, asking NATO summit to provide a clear invitation for Ukraine to join NATO, at least when the active war activities will stop. It didn't happen, and like it was in Bucharest 2008, Russia understood that the West is not ready and is lack of political will to invite Ukraine and Georgia at that time for NATO membership, and they attacked Georgia. So I don't know exactly, but it's possible that they understood not getting this clear message about the Ukraine's future as and encourage, it could encourage them to be more active, because they were, by the way, somehow not little bit, but quite surprised, because the West was so united after 24th of February 2022. But now maybe it's possible that maybe not showing enough strong political will, showing that we are somehow afraid to take some decisions, political decisions, not providing with necessary weapons to Ukraine. Maybe they understand this as a weakness, and they always are using this on their own benefits.
Madam, thank you very much for your answer. This is exactly what I wanted. My next question is, currently, Eastern NATO countries are strengthening their borders, facing a possible attack from the territory of Belarus. If that is happening, and Wagner's mercenaries cross the border of one of the states, will Article 5 of NATO be applicable in this case? And which country will be responsible? Russia or Belarus? I mean, after all, the Russian Wagnerites are now on the territory of Belarus, but they do not obey Lukashenko nor Putin, as far as I know. And both dictators are just free to say, we have nothing to do with them. What then?
If you would ask me this question some 5 years ago or even 3 years ago, I would say my answer would be that with huge fear that maybe NATO is not ready to have very clear answer what's going on, and maybe debates inside and some hesitations would prevail. But today, I think that nobody has any different understanding. What does it mean, Wagner mercenaries or Prigozhin mercenaries? Those are part of Russian Federation structures. This is not private groups. It was wrong to name them private groups, private military groups. Putin himself, he acknowledged, he mentioned this in the open speech after this so-called coup d'etat of Prigozhin trip to Moscow, which was stopped. He mentioned the real amount of money they are spending from their budget to keep going this group. So it is part of their hybrid warfare infrastructure or structure related with the military. They are using it as a tool in Africa, especially in African countries. We passed several resolutions already, especially after Mali, when French politicians woke up, understood what happened when those military groups supported were fighting against them. So I don't think that somebody will be in some hesitations to realize who is who and who is responsible for the decisions. Belarus, by the way, today is kind of annexed statehood, despite that still exists in the map, in European map, geographical map, political map, because member of United Nations. But on the ground, reality is that Belarus is owned or ruled from Kremlin, and everybody understands this.
Thank you very much. It was Rasa Jukneviciene, the former Ministry of Defense of Lithuania from 2008 to 2012. And now let us talk for something more. Let us get from military challenges to war crimes and punishment for it. Just as per Russians' beloved Dostoevsky novel, the Russian war crimes are so outrageous, obvious and numerous. What would be the inevitable punishment? I say inevitable because it is namely the inevitability of punishment that matters the most. It was exactly the lack of it that made Putin thinking he is some sort of an impune almighty emperor who decides who lives and who dies, but everything ends. So let us talk for more how Putin's story will. Just as for Putin, is it possible to really punish his outdated Soviet Russian dictator for the terror he unleashed against Ukraine? And what punishment could possibly be for such a scale of major crimes and misdemeanors against all humanity? Let us talk for more. The International Criminal Court was established to deal with 4 main international crimes: genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes and crimes of aggression. That is, everything that Putin has done and so far continues to do, but the ICC can condemn suspects only in person. And this objectively delays the moment of announcing Putin's sentence. 5 months ago, the International Criminal Court made a sensational decision. Putin was indicted. ICC issued an arrest warrant for the president of the terrorist country of Russia and the Commissioner for Children's Rights, Maria Lvova-Belova. Thus, the member states of the Rome Statute of the ICC are obliged to arrest and hand over Putin and Lvova-Belova to The Hague if they show up on the territories of these states. And there are 123 such states. Among them are not only European ones, which are sympathetic to Ukraine, but also 33 African countries, 28 countries of South America and the Caribbean, and 19 Asian-Pacific region states. However, it does not seem too real that anyone will arrest Putin while he is the president of the country. United States Department of State Global Criminal Justice Representative Beth Van Schaak in her interview said it will not be possible to overcome immunity, which any president of any state has. So, what is there remain? Well, a separate special international tribunal for Mr. Putin like Nuremberg one in 1945 will do just perfectly. A special passé resolution outlines what this tribunal should be looking like. It has to consider one case, actually, aggression against Ukraine that Russia began in 2014. Among the defendants of the special tribunal should be the political and military elite, not only of Russia, but also of Belarus. They have no immunity, and such a tribunal can produce a verdict in absentia. Currently, two main models of creating such a tribunal are being discussed. The first involves an international agreement with individual countries, and the second is based on an agreement between Ukraine and the UN Security General. There is also a proposal to create an interconnected international tribunal which includes Ukrainian and foreign judges who will act on the basis of Ukrainian law. Even so, the process of bringing Putin to justice may prove difficult, said the Prosecutor General of Ukraine, Andriy Kostin. Nevertheless, more than 36 countries have already supported the creation of such a tribunal.
And we are united in order to ensure full accountability for all crimes committed, including the crime of aggression. If crime of aggression should not have been committed, there would be no other 93,000 incidents of war crimes. And this day-to-day, for me, and I believe for my colleagues, is an evidence that establishment of special tribunal for the crime of aggression is now inevitable.
The creation of the tribunal and process of trial itself can last for years. But this is one of the main and necessary steps towards international justice, and the judging decision of the tribunal will serve as a reason for compensation to the victims and the restoration of Ukraine at the expense of Russia's frozen assets abroad. Now, some might say, why do we need to do that? Obviously, Putin is guilty, his crimes are so outrageous and so numerous and so obvious, and same obviously we can't reach him and put him on the bench in The Hague and then behind bars to the rest of his days. So why doing that? Spending time and effort for what? Some even might ask, why not to send a hitman, to send a bullet to his skull? Well, you can be professing that idea, that if history teaches us anything, that is that anyone can be killed. But if you are professing such an idea, just bear in mind that actually the dictator, Vladimir Putin, is literally thinking the same way as you do. Let's talk about that for more. And I had two quite interesting conversations for you in this regard with Mark Ellis, Executive Director of the International Bar Association, and Anton, Ambassador at Large in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. We speak about the tribunal for Putin and Russian high commanders, the punishment for their deeds, and what the world does to prevent new aggressions against itself. Experts agree that post-war legal order is in jeopardy, and that means that the global legislature and the international law and order system is just not ready for such a challenge as a crime of aggression at a given scale in Ukraine today. So I ask the gentlemen what and how they are going to change and what that brave new world would look like after they do.
In some ways, we've already moved into an environment where accountability for atrocity crimes is at the forefront of everyone's minds, individual states. In all of my years dealing with international criminal law, there's never been a time where there's been more attention on ensuring that those who have committed just the worst atrocities in the world are brought to justice. And this has been going on for a while. The development of the International Criminal Court, now the more progressive use of universal jurisdiction. Of course, we already had the hybrid courts. I think all indicate that the international community is in a new era where justice and accountability are really crucial. But Russia's attack, Russia's war against Ukraine, has even accelerated this idea that accountability and justice are absolutely critical for the international community, and now more than at any other time. And the element that you've mentioned, which is somewhat in the forefront of people's thinking, is the crime of aggression, because Russia unilaterally decided to invade Ukraine, violating every fundamental principle of international law. And when we think about the definition of the crime of aggression, Russia, but particularly Mr. Putin, because the crime of aggression is towards individuals, there's no question that that crime has been committed. And so I think we have the instruments here, even though there are challenges, because the International Criminal Court does not have jurisdiction over the crime of aggression that Russia has committed against Ukraine. So we have to find a new way, a new avenue to ensure that this crime, to me, the most serious crime, the crime of aggression, it has the support to ensure that we bring Mr. Putin and others to justice. So if you talk about the brave new world, in some ways we're there, but this will be a real test for the international community on whether or not we can find an avenue, a structural avenue, both that meets political and legal parameters, to ensure that Mr. Putin and other high-level leaders are brought to justice for the crime of aggression. It won't be easy because of there are lots of challenges here. But the fact that the international community now is focused on a serious attempt to create a mechanism for the crime of aggression against Mr. Putin, I think bodes well for the international community and for the success of ensuring that he is brought to justice.
Obviously, today we can't arrest Putin. So I'd ask experts about the tribunal in absentia. Is that possible? How it can be done? And can we expect any changes in Putin's behavior after such a sentence of such a court is brought?
Trials in absentia are not widely supported in international law. It's not to say they don't happen. They do happen, but generally they happen when there is the inability to bring the individual to court. But the ICC, the ad hoc tribunals for Yugoslavia, Rwanda, most of the tribunals, with the exception of the Special Tribunal for Lebanon, do not accept this idea of trials in absentia. However, I think it could happen, possibly with a new structure, whatever that structure might be, that the international community decides now, even with Mr. Putin still in Russia, to pursue a trial in absentia. But we know that we already know that Mr. Putin has been indicted by the International Criminal Court, and so not for the crime of aggression, as we know, but for war crimes. And I suspect that there'll be an amendment to those indictments and the arrest warrant, I think, in the future, and there'll be additional violations committed by Mr. Putin that will add to this indictment. And the International Criminal Court has to face this same challenge. Mr. Putin is not able to. He's not going to be. He's not going to be apprehended right now. But the idea that eventually he will be apprehended is what the international community is committed to.
Article 8 of the Rome Statute defines the crime of aggression as planning, preparation, initiation or execution of an act of aggression by a person who controls or directs a state's political or military action. A bunch of Russian elite members' profiles match that perfectly, so I ask my guests, who else should accompany Mr. Putin on the bench in The Hague?
I look at the ICC indictments. I bifurcate this issue, and I think it's important to separate it, to bifurcate it, because the indictment itself, the arrest warrant, is unprecedented. It's unprecedented for somebody of Mr. Putin's stature to be indicted for war crimes. It's not the first time a sitting head of state has been indicted, but certainly a sitting head of state of the stature of Mr. Putin. That is unprecedented. So we have to take a step back and say that is a significant step for international justice and for accountability, and we have to embrace that. I think we have to celebrate that that this is a court, an international court, the only permanent international criminal court that has now indicted and set out an arrest warrant for Mr. Putin. Now we have the other side of the coin, and that's the apprehension. That's a much more challenging request. It's a challenge not just for the ICC in relations to Mr. Putin, but every other tribunal that has indicted or set out an arrest warrant for a high-ranking, either a sitting head of state or somebody high-ranking, faces this challenge of apprehension. And apprehending the individual is dependent not on the court, but it's dependent on the international community. It's dependent on the political will of the international community to ensure that an individual who's been indicted and there's an arrest warrant will ultimately be brought to justice. And as I said, history shows that happens. And it either happens because the external set of states outside the nation decides that we're going to pressure that individual or the state to arrest the individual. This has happened, for instance, with Milosevic in the former Yugoslavia. Or this happens with al-Bashir in Sudan. The population begins to be wary. They lose their enthusiasm for this indicted war criminal. And it may seem odd now that you would think that Putin could lose that support. But again, history shows that that's oftentimes the case.
As I said, I also had a conversation with Anton, Ambassador at Large of the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In one of his interviews, he mentioned 38 countries that have taken the initiative to create a tribunal, each with its own legislation and capabilities. So I'd ask him how to manage this giant process, taking into account all these numerous nuances.
Which should have jurisdiction over the crime of aggression against Ukraine. And the very idea why these 38 states participate in the core group is that they believe that we cannot have this lacune, this gap in accountability system, that now we do not have any kind of a court which can try leadership of Russian Federation for the crime of aggression against Ukraine. So all the 38 states inside the core group, they are unified with this principle, with this goal, with this aim, to find out the best solution how to establish a tribunal. But of course, it is obvious that 38 states, each state might have its own preferences or its own views on how to establish a special tribunal. So that is why we need the core group. That is why we need to meet with participants of the core group regularly. And we already held 4 meetings, and we will have new meetings starting from September. So to find out this basis, this legal basis which would be okay for us, for Ukraine, and of course for our key international partners to move forward.
We all saw what Russia has done in the occupied Ukrainian lands. We all see what the Russian missiles do right now. We have already heard numerous Putin's testimonies about his glorious plans and victorious battles and righteous actions. However, all the accusations against the Kremlin's Tsar are not yet voiced aloud, but rather chastely veiled under the blurry general term of war crimes. Even the ICC indictment and the warrant appears to cover only one of numerous Putin's crimes: Ukrainian children abduction and their illegally sending to Russia. Why?
It's not because of the absence of the tribunal, but of course, the absence of the tribunal unfortunately makes it impossible now to try Russian leadership for the crime of aggression. And we believe that this should be fixed, and this gap, this lacune should be fulfilled, and there should be a special tribunal. I also wouldn't say that there are some political matters or issues. We need all to understand that investigation and prosecution in relation to core international crimes is not an easy job. And moreover, we understand that currently in the territory of Ukraine, there are thousands of war crimes and crimes against humanity committed pretty much on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. So it's not so easy really to investigate and prosecute, but our law enforcement agencies and Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court do the job. So we are sure that these two first arrest warrants are only the first ones, and we will see more of these arrest warrants. They will follow. But the very case, I think, is that this crime of war crime, of illegal deportation, of illegal transfer of Ukraine's children is very obvious. I mean, there are orders signed by these persons. There are video recordings how these persons are participating in the commission of this crime. So I think that it was decided that these arrest warrants should start with something, and that the most appropriate crime to start with is the illegal deportation, illegal transfer of children. But as I said, I'm sure that more arrest warrants for representatives of Russian leadership will follow.
According to international law and diplomatic rules, world leaders enjoy immunity. However, we all understand that it is necessary to punish Putin as soon as possible. So I asked how to bypass legal immunity and whether there is such a possibility at all. Here's what Anton Korynevych answered.
It's important to mention that the International Criminal Court in The Hague, which issued the arrest warrants for Vladimir Putin, this International Criminal Court does not recognize any kind of immunities. So, and this arrest warrant issued for Putin is the symbol of this. Because if the International Criminal Court understood and recognized that this person has a personal immunity, then this court should not have been able to issue an arrest warrant because of immunity. But we see that International Criminal Court strictly works on the basis of its Rome Statute, and Article 27 of Rome Statute provides that there are no immunities for anybody. So, President of the Russian Federation, Prime Minister of the Russian Federation, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, they can be tried in International Criminal Court. And the arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin is legitimate, legal, and it's officially working now. So each and every state, which is a state party to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, does have an obligation to detain, arrest, and surrender this person to The Hague, to the International Criminal Court. So this arrest warrant works now. And we can also see this in the example of this summit, which is going to take place soon. And the Russian president will not go to that summit because of the obligation of the host state of the summit to enforce, to execute all the arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court. So, of course, we cannot predict when these persons may be arrested. For this, they should be on the territory of a state which does have an obligation to execute arrest warrants of the International Criminal Court. So, on the territory of a state which is a state party to the Rome Statute. So, we believe it's a matter of time.
Well, that seems to be it, dear world, in terms of crime and punishment. Crime of Vladimir Putin and punishment for him and his reservoir dogs. The inevitable punishment will find them, mark my words. And for now, I must say my goodbyes to you. I'm Henry Keane, and it was my show. Talk for more. If you liked the episode, press the like button. If you didn't like it for some strange reason, write in the comments below why. And press the bell to be the first to see the most up-to-date information. And don't forget to subscribe to the Gaze platform on YouTube and all across social networks. Keep in touch. See you soon.